Thank you. Did anybody go to my talk earlier today? Great. So I I said it was tomorrow, so I almost didn't show up. So this is good that you guys were able to figure it out that I was wrong. So hopefully you enjoyed this. There was actually another speaker that was scheduled for this, and I was asked to sort of jump in and talk a little bit about motion. But I'm actually super excited. The talk earlier today was the one that got selected for this conference, and this was the one that I really wanted to do. So I'm super jazzed, super stoked. Hopefully this is good for some of you. I'm not going to show a lot of code. I'm going to show a lot of pretty pictures and animation and stuff. So hopefully that's a good way to end the day. I don't know if you're kind of code brain overload, but hopefully this will be a nice treat to end the day. We will talk a little bit about some of the frameworks and so on and so forth. Little disclaimers. I feel like I know you guys. We're all together now. You've already sort of get my background. I am a visual designer and creative director at a digital agency, so I do swim in the marketing and advertising world. I say that as a disclaimer because I'm not really ingrained in enterprise level application or product development. I have done a little bit of that in my past, but what a lot of them I'm going to talk about today is how motion, how I got started in motion, and how it has evolved into the modern web. So my roots is actually quite comprehensive. I started traditionally trained graphic designer, hated print. The web was a little bit cumbersome for me at the time. This was during Netscape Navigator, and CSS hadn't even come out yet, so I was like, okay, screw that. And I jumped into motion graphics. Went to grad school in animation. My first job was for the NFL Network, and this was when the network first started. So it was just a dream job. I got on a team that was working about doing 30-second spots to brand the network, to create awareness so that they can gain subscribers. The key I'm showing to this is that there's a really interesting process in motion graphics and animation in general where it's very planned and it's very linear. So you know from start to end, you know your narrative, you know how it's going to roll out. You choreograph it. I was on the pre-visualization team, part of storyboarding and some initial pre-modeling and renders about what the commercial would be before actual final asset creation and animation went into production. And so it has this very non-interactive path. Like, you know exactly how somebody's going to consume it. You know from start to finish what it's going to be. There's no level of interactivity, of choice. And so in that way, it's very exciting, but in another way, it's actually kind of disappointing. You spend 6 months developing this 30-second piece of content to be consumed over the course of a week and then thrown away, right? So it's this interesting field to be in. So the web was a really attractive place for me. So I quickly jumped over when this really sweet tool came out called Flash. And I was like, holy crap, this is my Batmobile. I can do this. And so, it kind of took off from there. I'm going to just quickly, I have a couple of case studies to kind of show some interesting, I think, and relevant challenges that I faced in working in, kind of translating MoGraph into interaction. And how that kind of works, I think, still today in some of these methodologies. One of the projects is actually a digital installation for a community college down in North Carolina. And the ask from the client was, we want to create an installation that is highly engaging. This is going to be, gigantic flat-screen TVs within their administrative building, and there's a different installation at every floor of the building. Now, it's sort of like, and by the way, we only have money for one TV on the bottom floor, but we want to do 3 screens on the middle floor, and we want to do 2 on the top floor, and we don't want to pay you for 3 different things, so can you make it adaptive? So it was this really interesting ask. So the first goal was actually, okay, how do we actually create an adaptive installation, but still, and cost effectively, but still have a lot of visual engagement? So you can kind of see the building there, so I'm not blowing smoke. This is sort of, site visits are really important when you're doing installation-based work. Understanding the space, how far the user is going to stand away from it. And then at the agency, we have this kind of protocol to where emerging technologies and installations, we prototype, we build out or simulate essentially the environment in the office, and we design against that. There's really no other way to do this. We've tried and we've failed. So we'll build out these different installations within the space We ask that the actual hardware that will be installed delivered to our office first and then shipped out. And this is kind of an example of that. But the point I want to come across here is the presence of motion and how content really drove a lot of the decisions in design. We knew that, by the way, this experience was managed by WordPress. I love saying that. Everybody's like, what? So the client's requirement was they wanted to be able to log into a content management tool to be able to update imagery and text and basically anything you saw on the screen. They didn't have any skilled or savvy staff. They're essentially, well, how are you going to, what kind of imagery are you going to put up? Oh, I'm just going to go out in the yard and take a photo of a student, and I want to be able to upload that. So we're looking at like really low res, horribly cropped iPhone photos from an administrator. So I'm like, oh man, shit, how are we going to do this? And be able to span that image across 3 screens and still make it look good. So the front-end dev team actually came up with this concept of the crystallization effect. So that image would come into the front-end side, would take that image, dupe it 3 times, scale it at a random proportion, and then display that on the screen. So you can see that the student there at the writing desk, that's one image the client uploads, and the front end actually creates that effect and actually fills that 3-panel out with that one single image. So it's really creative and ingenious solution, and allowed us to really push motion. It wasn't kind of a compromise. You can kind of see that zoomed in here, and the same thing sort of as, and I think it also takes kind of the parallaxing to a new and interesting level. The single screen on the bottom floor was full touch. The other screens weren't touch, so we had some interesting liberties. And I just want to show this, and I'm going to move on because I have a lot to talk about. But thinking about navigation in a touch experience that large, your buttons, you want them to make them really big so that you're not kind of either confined to this little space, but you're actually really getting the user to interact and experience the brand. The front end was done in Flash, right? It was the last Flash project I've done, so I'm going to cry, put it to bed. And here's kind of where I'm at. This is Batman now, getting his ass kicked. Totally getting his ass kicked. But I love it. And I love being here because at heart I'm obviously still an animator and a visual designer, and I work hand in hand daily with front-end devs, back-end devs to do these things. I massive passion. I want to continue to do these things. So you can imagine my excitement when Google released their new brand guideline called Material Design. Material Design is essentially a brand guideline that is based in motion in itself. And we're starting to see a lot of their applications being fully integrated, calendar, mail, with these motion philosophies and techniques. And it's very exciting. It's like, I was almost like going to jump ship back to motion graphics, and Google kind of came in and said, yeah, man, you're there with me. All right, let's do this. Let's keep going. And it's quite interesting. So we've taken a lot of that philosophy into a lot of the new work that we're doing. This app is, and by the way, when I look at web experiences and this kind of responsive design phenomenon, it's a lot more difficult to employ some of these techniques. The same technology in mobile is a completely different story. We're seeing a lot of really great and powerful motion, intuitive motion happening in the mobile space that just isn't happening in the web space. And so we've tested all. We've done a lot of work in mobile for that reason. And this is an example of that. I promise I don't have the animation on this. But a lot of animated infographics and swiping and moving in and out of spaces instead of your traditional reload page is, clients love it. Users are really just getting completely thrilled. This is actually a sales app. It helps sell trucks, and it does really well. Most of it's because the sales guys say, hey, look, you can save $200,000 on your fuel. Look, the number's animating up. Yeah, I got to buy that, right? So it's great. The other big thing that's really excited me is gaming, and this is a mobile app. We worked with a company out in San Francisco called Storm8. These guys basically heard of Zynga, the big gaming company. So the guys broke off of that and started their own company. And at the time, sorry, my earpiece keeps falling off. They didn't have an art department, so I knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy, and they called me up and said, hey, can you be my art department? I was like, yeah, oh my God, sure. So for about a year and a half, we were producing about a game a month. It's ridiculous. And this was probably about a year after the iPhone came out. Fast forward a few years, And I think this is kind of the epitome of a lot of this stuff. This is basically Farmville, but in the Roman Empire side. But the design challenge was, how do you fit the Roman Empire into the size of a phone? It was horrible. It was like, oh my gosh, it was this nightmare. Farmville, Zynga had started to break some ground in some of these UI challenges. And so we were kind of looking at what they were doing, but we were also sort of inventing the practice as we were going. We were using tools like Live View. You ever heard of this? Where you can actually design and see on your phone in real time, right? So you can design in Photoshop, and that was, you actually see it happening. So it's basically screen sharing. All these crazy things to sort of figure it out. But motion actually came in and was sort of the saving grace. How can we fit a lot of content and interaction and buttons? Am I standing okay in the light? I keep walking around. Good. Stand here, Ron. Don't move. And animation, sort of overlapping panels, sliding in and out, became really the solve to actually fitting all of this content and user interaction within a very small screen. And so it's no surprise why mobile has really, I think, been the testing ground and the sort of pioneering space for UI animation. Because they have to. This is these guys setting up an 85-inch touchscreen. I'm not sure if I have video of it, but there's me on my computer, kind of this huge screen, and I'm like moving type. You know, it's just an interesting experience to design for that scale. Right? We get so used to designing down here, here, and here. Then we go here, and everything changes. The ask on this was, we want you to design this really amazing 85-inch touchscreen that responds to an iPad. It's like, okay, there's another okay, should I go back into the MoGraph industry again? I know it's a 16:9 ratio. I don't have to deal with all this BS, right? What's going on? So, of course, we had to use web technology. It's like the only way to do this is just see how we can break Chrome, Google Chrome, see how far we can push it. So we go through our traditional waterfall process, sketching, storyboarding, wireframing. We do full interactive prototypes, I think using Foundation. Don't quote me on it. And we presented this stuff to the client, and they're just sort of glassed over, like, this is lame. Like, I don't get it. How is this going to be engaging at all? And we kind of agreed with them. We're like, oh, well, this is kind of how we make websites, and we got to use this technology because you said it had to work on the iPad. So we were at this kind of interesting crossroads, and of course, me come in, Ron. Motion will solve this. Motion will actually make this a lot better. We can really let's design it so it's not like a website. Right? Let's make that a requirement. Let's make that a project requirement. Make it not like a website. So we tried a lot of different things, Framer, a lot of different prototyping tools, and essentially what happened was we jumped into After Effects for about a day, and we started moving boxes around, scaling boxes, and really very quickly, within a matter of 10 to 20 minutes, rapid prototyping what interaction could possibly be like. And we presented two sketches, what I call motion sketching, back to the client. The first one was kind of based on Xbox, PS4, sort of console gaming interfaces, very fluid menu systems. And the second one was just kind of based on this idea of dimensionality. How can we, with CSS transforms and some JavaScript, actually feel like we're moving in and out of spaces? So take literally the main navigation and make that the experience. Which one do you think they chose, by the way? I'm just curious. The second one. Yeah, it was like a no-brainer. Oh, number 2. That's amazing. Let's do that. So we did. Now, the other point I want to show here is that, and I showed this in the earlier talk, really up to this project, up to this point, our process was design, then build. Right? And this is typically the process for a lot of us, right? Obviously, UX, UI, prototyping, content architecture, all that inspires design then moves into build. This was different. We actually dev'd first, figured out how we would actually build this first, and then the design was inspired by that. So this design here was actually a reflection of those prototypes that we had done. If we had done it the other way around, if we had designed first, we would have never achieved anything like this. And I think that was revolutionary for me, and it's something that we're continuing to do. Design is led by technology. The other thing that the motion prototypes and the development brought along was this idea of color coding or color wayfinding system. So every section of the site, as I flow in and out, would shift colors so that the user could have some kind of note, sort of awareness of where they were within that main site architecture. And so this style sheet is probably one of the most comprehensive color systems. We couldn't actually figure out how to dynamically generate harmonic hue colors, so we had to go in and literally pick every hex code. So it was interesting. This is another example of that color shift. And again, you had different audience segments. So you had the hospitality. By the way, this is for a company that makes fitness equipment. Forget, I never give you the context of what's going on. And they had different channels, different audience segments. They had those were in hospitality, as you can see here, and those were sort of the meatheads, the really heavy muscle. And they wanted to be able to change the tone and feel of the experience based on those characteristics. The other thing is that, and this is based on user testing, when you have an installation, this big 85-inch installation, it's running nonstop. It's running even when users aren't interacting with it, which is something we don't think about when we're on a website. Somebody goes to a website, they're engaged, they're ready to interact, or they're bored and they leave and they go on. With an installation, there's actually a point of stagnation where things aren't being interacted with. So how do you deal with that? Screensavers. And this, we wanted to make something dynamic. So here's where using modern web technology is really, really powerful. So we could bring in, during that event, there were speaker sessions. We could bring in dynamic data that would constantly refresh itself throughout the day. So the screensaver essentially was dynamic and was actually useful, purposeful as a trade show example. And here's some of that material design inspiration. So once we were from that main menu navigation experience, eventually we had to get into essentially a web content layout. You can kind of see that transition here. So that's a product image, product gallery, so on and so forth. And just so I'm not blowing smoke, this is actually video of the thing in action. These guys had nothing to do with the project, but, you know, they're big goofballs. So, history to what we're doing now to some 4 tasty nuggets. So I want to leave you some insights, some things that I've learned in working with the team and working on these things that might help you think about motion. It's very high level, but it's actually helped me. Obviously, you got the 5 principles of what we call UI animation right now. Ease, number 1. Ease everything if you can, right? Animation in itself is sort of the illusion of reality, right? So nothing in this world is sort of robotic in its motion. It's not straight. It doesn't happen in its sort of constant path. There's a push and pull. There's friction. Motion is not decoration, and this is really hard for me as a visual designer. It's really hard for me as a motion designer. But when we talk about interaction design, it's really important to know when it's useful and when it's needed and how to use it. Be sensitive to those. It's also very expensive. We talked about this earlier this morning about the cost of building for the modern web. It's very costly. And from a front-end dev standpoint, there's a lot of frameworks and libraries you need to put into place to get this stuff to work. Hold back. This is, again, a lesson for me. And you are the composer. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. One of the challenges I see with a lot of designers, especially front-end designers, is when they think about motion and apply it to a specific interface, they think about only a specific element. And this is really strong when we talk about atomic design and modular design. Everything's in these modules. The problem with that is that when a user hits a site, loads a page, motion is relative, right? It's about the corresponding relationships with objects on the page. So you can't just think about that single element. You have to think about it, the whole composition together. So the solo. This is just a shape animated with JavaScript around some random circle. There's nothing wrong with this. This evokes a specific experience and emotion, right? Then the ensemble. This is that same JavaScript element, just duplicated a million times. Right? So as a motion designer, especially in interactivity, you have to really think about that as a composer. As you're looking at using your entire instrument, your orchestra, and tools and how things are interacting and responding with each other, contextual to that experience. What do you want people to feel? How do you want them to interact? Tip number 2 is, and this really comes from the motion design world, nesting. I see a lot of developers kind of get to the table like, I want this button to kind of do this when I roll over it, but I really only have a CSS transform that I can apply to this one div. What am I going to do? This ball is actually within its own div, and it has a transform with an ease on it. But then you wrap that in a div, and you animate that wrapper or that container, right? You kind of display that off. And now you have an even more complicated animation. So nesting animations within themselves, within different containers, and animating those independently can create some really interesting, high-performing animations. You can apply this to a lot of different scenarios. This is no different than what we do in sort of, no different what Pixar does in sort of moving arm joints and everything. You have one thing is animated that actually responds to another. It's all about that grouping of objects. And then the third, most important to me, is motion as design. A good example of this, and I think I showed this earlier today, is, one it was really inspiring to me is this kind of idea of CSS transforms. I'll spend a little bit of time on this since I didn't earlier. There is, in the WebKit transform, there's the skew option, right? You have skew and translate, and all of these options are actually intendedly designed for animation, intended for animation. And the skew option was actually, I wasn't aware of this until about 6 months ago. We never really had a use for it, except possibly to bend an object to create a three-dimensionality effect to it. And I said, hey, why don't we use, instead of an animation, why don't we use skew as a layout tool? Right? A lot of our clients get really sick of this kind of boxy sort of layout. It's very useful in a lot of sort of tabular and editorial content, but something where you really want to grab the eye and engage, but still have that page be, HTML text and simple and not, graphic or not some complicated, non-responsive solution, would be actually just put a slight skew on it. And that whole div then becomes something more visually interesting. And that's just an example. And again, motion as design, as I said before, the motion itself inspired design. It couldn't have happened any other way. And then front-end development versus visual and content design. This is a huge debate happening right now at the agency. A lot of my peers. Where does the role lie? Who is the animator? Who is responsible for these things? What do we have to learn to do these things, right? And I don't necessarily have the answer, but I want to talk about a couple of scenarios where I believe the front-end development community and front-end developers in general are really the future of animation on the web. I think you have the knowledge base more than a sort of a graphic designer or even a motion designer is used to WYSIWYG tools and Bezier curves and graph editors. But you understand what your limitations are and you understand how to push them. This example, we had a client, No Nonsense. They make, you ever heard of No Nonsense? They make tights and leggings. This is the wrong audience. Like, okay, there's some people here. I've tried them on. I've done the whole user testing of it. I don't know how you ladies do it. It's hard. But the ask was to actually take one photo shoot and take the content from that photo shoot and spread it across many different digital channels. Now, we know the web is a boxed world. So our concept back to the client was, let's put all the models in boxes and let those boxes be aspect ratios of our responsive grid and our banner sizes. And that's what we did. You can see this. They're kind of working within the boxes. What's funny is that the photographer was just completely clueless of why we were doing this. And you can see her shoe kind of exceeds the line there. She said, no, move her back. She's going to break the web. You can't do that. So the point is that because we had an innate understanding of how this content was going to be delivered, how it would be wrapped, how it would be placed, we could then create content that best suited that need. And I think front-end developers are uniquely poised in that position. The other thing that I see a lot of front-end devs think about is layers, right? We naturally have to do this because we work on divs. We work in, what now is a better version of tables. And we think about how things overlap and how we move down the page in this sense of layers. What is a background element? What is a foreground element? This is a huge element of animation, how things are working in a dimensional layer. This is an example of just totally hit a wall on a project where the client wanted to interact with this F-16 fighter. And they would not compromise on the visual integrity of the jet. So like, we'll do WebGL, make it a 3D jet, but there's performance issues with getting high-resolution imagery out of browser-based three-dimensional objects. So the only way to do this is with a movie. We have to render out a flat movie. We want it to be interactive within real time. So Shelton, the front-end developer, said, what if we brought in the movie and we used JavaScript to play the movie forward and play the movie in reverse? And let's fake the sort of assumption that the user is spinning that jet in real time when all they're really doing is playing a movie forward and backward. And it worked. It completely fooled the client. The users were really into it. So it's great, right? And so this came from understanding the environment that you're working in. And it's actually a quite simple experience from a code standpoint, but very, very visually rich and highly engaging. The other thing, and I'll kind of show you an example here, is obviously 3JS. We are using the crap out of that right now. Where is my... I hate jumping on a keynote because it gets weird. Ignore my desktop. So this is me playing around, so excuse me. Can you see that? Can you see the white lines? This is my designerness making it hard for you to read. But this is simply just a 3JS background. And you can see the mouse as I move, the motion gets a little bit more intense away from the center object, the object that I want you to be interested in. And it acts and responds to my mouse. And all I'm simply doing is moving the camera, right? Sort of virtual camera in space. I'm not animating all of these objects. I'm moving one object around. It's very simple, high performing. And I think this is really key. We talk about high performing the future of the web. This runs on mobile. When we talk about content, right? The go-to right now is to slap an image in the background, this big, beautiful image. But there's this huge opportunity for front-end developers to actually be content creators, provide these great visual content opportunities that actually in real time respond to the user, which is fantastic. How much time do I have? Anybody know? Infinite amount. You guys are going to be here till 9 o'clock. We're going to have some fun. No. And then I showed this example earlier today. This is sort of where we're at now, very complex WebGL solutions, again, about being able to provide insights and ideas around content creation. This experience, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It's currently in development, aggregates Twitter data around a hashtag, and then assigns a specific tweet to an individual object within the scene. So every one of those square objects is actually a user. And based on their mood, they get categorized across different visual shapes. Basically, we create a matrix. We scrape the tweet and say if the word love or hate or pissed or cray is used, we'll categorize that against a specific mood type. Let me talk through some of this a little bit because I know there's some of my people out there. So Angular for general app architecture, manage that front-end layer. So you got, again, that idea of layers. 3JS and Effects Composer. Effects Composer is my new best friend. If you haven't played with it, try it out. Check it out. It's really fun. When looking, and sort of I'm an After Effects guy, so basically post and visual effects. So you render that first layer. Effects Composer can come over and actually do some interesting post-effect distortions on that live object within browser. Performance is amazing. I think we're running still around 60 frames per second. D3 for advanced SVG. SVG is your friend. There's a lot of tools out there for making them lightweight and scalable, right? You hear this a lot, the scalability of SVG. And then GreenSock GSAP is something that we're playing with right now for that performance bump. It's wicked fast. As we kind of look at that compared to jQuery. So the end solution is everything I've shown you today is not the result of a single individual. That would be really impossible. I haven't met a person who could actually, you could over given 6 to 12 months probably pull it off. But within a reasonable amount of time and a reasonable budget, get some of these things done. And it's why I truly believe in the power of collaboration and the power of specialization. So by meaning of specialization, I don't mean you need to get really good at one thing and not know anything else. I have a good knowledge of front-end development toolkits, but I would never be able to jump in and create some of these things, right? A lot of this stuff I'll do pre-visualization and art direction on, but I rely on that team to create some amazing things. There's an article out there that just came out a few days ago, Designers to Design, Coders to Code. Truly believe in this philosophy. And obviously I encourage empathy across the board. So if I can leave you with anything, is find really great people as good as you, but provide different value. Get in a room and work together, that you push each other to realms that you couldn't possibly imagine. And I'll step back, a case example. I have a little bit of time. My first job at LA for the NFL Network, I didn't know jack. I was right out of school. I was terrified. I sit down and there's a student right out of CalArts who was just amazing at Maya, which is a 3D software application program. He comes in and whips together this kind of three-dimensional football player, and I'm like modeling a triangle. I'm like, holy F, like I'm going to get fired. I know that, right? But the point is, it drove me, this other individual drove me to go to Barnes & Noble, buy 3 Maya books, stay up all night, and learn as much as I can so that a fear of getting fired had come in the next day. I learned more in that first week than I ever did in my entire school program. And it's because I placed myself, luckily, in an environment where others around me were better than me, way better than me. And it instantly pushes you to reach some interesting boundaries. And it challenges you, right? And challenges all the things you read about the norms. Well, what's next? What can I bring to the table? And who's encouraging me and pushing me to do that? This is just a fun little thing, because sort of a visual manifesto of the way that I see things. If you were to look at Myjive as one person, this is what it would look like. And anyways, I do have a course coming out on O'Reilly, a video course about 5 to 6 hours long about prototyping with After Effects. So a lot of the deep level stuff that you see in here, check it out. It's coming out in November. It's really cool. It's sort of a shameless plug. It's not out yet, but questions? Anything? How much time do we have for 12 minutes of questions? Yeah. It is a element of 3JS that I'm going to brutally murder this program that you can set on top that will actually do image distortion. So once it renders, it actually takes that render and distorts it. So you can have light effects. You can sort of bend and warp an image. So you can think about it as the browser rendering once and then rendering again with a distortion on something. So it works really well with like 3-dimensional objects that you really don't get to look, but you want to add another layer of interest to it. Does that explain it? That's a very high level. Just Google Effects Composer. There's actually a lot of, you pull down from Git a lot of examples and just run it right into your workflow. Yeah, another question, same person.
When you're trying to bring experience across desktop, tablet, mobile, what are some of the considerations that you picked up on?
Right. So I don't believe in responsive web design. Boom, there it is. Okay, fired. I believe in an adaptive web design, and it's all semantics when we get into this. But we talk about throwing on Bootstrap, getting a column grid shift layout in there, and not ever thinking about what content displays on that mobile phone versus desktop. I see this happen time and time again. So every time I hit a site on mobile, it responds and it looks good, but it's not contextually what I need because I'm in a different place and mindset as I'm interacting in mobile. When we talk about animation, and I talk specifically about mobile, I'm really looking at it as standalone app experiences that really don't have a web connection to it, right? It's a very different type of thing. You can really harness the power of animation there. In terms of a responsive site, it's about pulling out a lot of that animation, right? It's just too cumbersome and too performance intensive. Now, some of the newer phones can handle it, but you're looking at a massive diversity of phone types, and it just kills those little browsers. And I would not recommend a lot of the stuff I see you're seeing here work on that. Scale it back and truly think about that mobile experience and what it means and what it is that they're trying to get out of it. Now, in the future, completely different story. Especially, and there's a lot of conversations today about server-side rendering and pushing that down, almost like a video feed from the server, where the server itself, imagine in the cloud, there's this machine with a processing power way faster than all our computers combined, right? We're going to have a very different conversation at that point. And that's actually a very exciting future. Any other questions? Yeah, in the back.
This is kind of a broad question, but you mentioned learning Maya overnight, compared to reading 3 books.
Yeah.
Where would you draw the line between learning a new skill to fulfill a need for a project versus bringing a specialist onto the team?
I think it's the longevity. So if you're from a business mindset, if you feel like there's a skill set that you know you can sell a lot and there's a lot of opportunity out there, I would consider that as a potential hire. One of the things that we do is, and we're actually considering a new hire, we're calling it creative technologist, but that has a lot of baggage to it. But the idea is a coder that can just sit day in and day out trying to break things, trying to create things that maybe we haven't thought of before, and invest our money into an individual who can do R&D and push the browsers forward in a single individual. And if something sticks or something actually carries into a client project, we consider transferring that person over to that full-time specialty or hiring to fill that in. So there's other ways to kind of do some experimentation on more of a low cost than trying to bring somebody in for a long haul. The other issue is constant learning is really, you have to constantly be sort of consuming what's next and what's new. I know it's a very kind of stressful thing, but I think every field, whatever you're in, medicine, you have to do that. You have to sort of be a part of some of the best practices. Does that answer your question?
Like, for example, like, I started out After Effects and CSS was more effective stuff.
Right. Yeah. CSS transforms and After Effects are very different in terms of learning the tools. What do you get out of them are actually quite similar. Again, we can go have dinner if you want. Right. There's a really long answer to that. But I think the short answer is, from a development standpoint, having the right build stacks for these different types of scenarios. You're not going to use Three.js for your typical responsive web layout. So it's having these kind of toolkits that you can run against for any project. And you'll know that pre-design, what your tech requirements are, what your client requirements are. So you'll have an idea. And then have the designer and developer, if they're truly two different people, work together through design. So one of the things we started implementing was in the sketch process, wireframing process, the developer actually building the site, rapid prototyping it. And that, again, inspires design. So there's really rich collaboration happening. So it's not like just, here's this thing, now bring it into here. It's kind of already in the process of making as it's working. Does that answer your question? It's a short way of saying it. Right. Yeah, we generally won't show an end client or stakeholder a design until it's been fully vetted in terms of can it be built? Is it even the most simplest things? And can it be tested against multiple devices? Yeah.
Web projects, do you have any graphical tools that you use? Like, not necessarily go into code.
Right.
But I know Adobe has something.
In terms of design and layout?
Yeah. And animation.
Oh, yeah. So we use, obviously, Photoshop and Illustrator are the key. In terms of animation, our go-tos are Cinema 4D and After Effects right now. For web pre-visualization. For prototyping, it's we've used Framer, we've used After Effects. I'm trying to understand your question. In terms of like an interface to animate in the web, so we don't, right? There are things like Edge Animate from Adobe, and we've tampered with it. There's another system that we've used called Hype. I think it's Hype 3, which allows you to animate, and that spits out code. And those work. I think those work for kind of small scale stuff. It's like any WYSIWYG, you don't really know the performance and quality of that code that it spits out, so it's not a preferred solution. Any animation tools we use for web is purely for previs and prototype to fail as fast as possible with it without pulling in all these complicated JavaScript libraries, so that when you're ready to code, you know exactly where you're aiming for, where you're trying to achieve, and it's almost like reverse engineering that visual. It's so much faster and easier. And actually, I get a thrill out of watching even Vasil, who's our backend developer. He'll look at something and he gets total excitement out of trying to make it work, trying to achieve that thing, because he knows what he's trying to reach. He knows what he's trying to actually solve versus, hey, man, can you just kind of make up something that's cool and moves like this? You get nowhere real fast. So having that thing animated, even if it's a movie, everyone can get around it. Everyone can have conversations around it. And then you know everyone's on the same team making it happen. Yeah?
What are some of the tools you use on a daily basis?
Me personally, Keynote. Photoshop, After Effects, Cinema 4D. I use, from a programming standpoint, Sublime. I actually have my guys set up a build stack for me, so I was running Grunt and Bootstrap and things like that, so I can actually live get in there in my CSS and live changes. I'm not a person who writes it, renders, version it, pull up the browser, see it. I mean, I just want to kill myself. So really have the right build tools and process so that you can actually, as a designer, really tweak and see those things happening in real time. So I apologize I can't give you that whole list, but I can. I feel like an idiot, but yeah.
When you're bringing front-end developers up to speed on working with animations, do they have to learn a whole new vocabulary? You can't just show them and say, okay, reproduce this, but they have to get to know all these new words, like all those squashing, stretching, arc, and things like that.
Sure.
Is it just a new set of words that they need to absorb and understand? Is that how you communicate the discrete animations that they need to build?
Yeah. I think there's this interesting language gap between a developer and an animator, just as there is a developer and a designer. And the parallel of design would be kerning, which is letter spacing, right? Leading, which is line height. And there's this kind of, it will always be the same with animation. This is the same thing, right? Easing, Bezier curve is kind of the rules we use, but it's very different terminology and how you would apply that. So I think it's actually sitting down and actually doing a duality list. Is actually on my things to do before I die, and okay, what is the terminology here? What is the terminology here? And I'll come to a meaning of the mind, and just constantly educate each other on this, so that when you are speaking the language, you're kind of speaking it in the same way and you understand each other. Because how you would apply, an easy ease or a ramp in and After Effects is very different translation into how easing happens in even CSS transforms and some of those applications. So it's kind of learning that they all do the same thing, which is funny. It's just they were developed by different people in different times. 0 minutes of just being flagged. I don't know if that answers your question, but you got to talk. You got to get together and have dinner like we're going to have later. So thank you all so much for coming. Hopefully it was great. Yeah.